Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. An absolute pleasure to be able to speak to you today. Maybe you could just kick off with a brief introduction to this film, Clean. What can people expect if they watch it?
Clean is a tough, nasty, unapologetically violent, but also I think really quite soulful film featuring a brilliant performance by Adrien Brody, who produced, co-wrote, and scored the film, and just gives a performance like you really have not seen from him before.
And of course, you had worked together previously on Bullet Train, but this was quite a specific, very personal passion project, really, of Adrian's, something that he'd kind of had bubbling up, I guess, for a while. So could you talk us through a bit of the genesis of the project and how you sort of came on board, co-writing and directing, and him obviously producing, writing, doing the score and all these bits and bobs, different hats you were both wearing?
We were working on a movie called Bullet Head, although Bullet Train sounds like a really exciting film. And he and I just really got along together. We had very similar sensibilities and I think probably sensitivities, and we definitely knew we wanted to do something. Adrien had a sort of really kind of like a visceral, emotional notion of a character that he wanted to play, and he also had the idea of doing a movie that was made really without any interference, entirely off the grid and independently. So my job was to help him realize that vision.
What kind of process do you have of working together? And do you think there's any kind of challenges of coming on board with something that someone's been ruminating over for a while? Or, on the flip side, is there kind of that infectious energy when someone's just so deeply into a story that you just want to get on board and you just want to be involved with it?
I love working with Adrien so much. I mean, it's very, development process with him was very easy. We started working together while he was on Peaky Blinders, and I came out to Manchester to do post with him. We did a little looping session and then just walked around the city, and it was great. It was really inspiring. We drank a lot of caffeine, and we're both from the East Coast, so we walk a lot. And we just walked around this great old city with, just sort of being inspired by, this kind of like post-industrial landscape, and just kind of dreaming about what this could be. I mean, it really was still very amorphous at that time. We just kind of started spitballing. And, when I was at the time, I was sort of back and forth between LA and New York, and I would hit him up when I was in New York. He would do the same when he was in LA. And we just get up and spitball and, chew on it and start to build this character. And over the course of, many months, while we were both doing our other stuff, this thing just started sort of becoming more and more real and taking on more and more life.
And in terms of this character, I mean, obviously the way that it unfolds, we don't get the full backstory straight away. We're shown in glimpses, and it's kind of this drip feed. But how did you see him as a character? Because of course he does have this very violent past, but he's trying to move away from it, and then is kind of pulled back in, and you're not sure how to see this. Is this something like a relapse, or is this actually a chance to, even though it's through violence, to redeem himself? How did you see the character, and how did you see his arc throughout the film?
Yeah, that's really well articulated. I think there's definitely a conflict there, and there's definitely the metaphor, not even really a metaphor, of addiction, and recovery. And he's sort of co-addicted, in a very complicated way. He has a more sort of traditional addiction that he's been battling, and he also has a really unusual relationship with violence. And these two things are sort of together for him. We talked a lot about, recovery from addiction is a daily process, not you don't flip the switch, sort of a daily process that requires a lot of work. And Clean does a lot of work. He needs to do a lot of work just to keep himself, from sort of slipping back. We don't exactly know what that means at first, and we sort of come to understand as time goes on that his experience with violence and drugs has some crossover, and so I talked to with Adrien about it in terms like the siren call of violence and addiction, and he sort of needs to continue to do this daily amends process, where he's trying to make right for the things that he's done in the past, and it's a sort of continual living meditation and recommitment every moment, and it's a beautiful thing, really, a very horrible but beautiful, simple, intense thing. And Adrien, is just a completely brilliant actor, is a sort of perfect guy to do that.
And maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the look and feel of the film, because it does have this very particular aesthetic, kind of the darkness of it. I don't know whether you saw it as kind of influenced by sort of, neo-noir 70s type films, other kind of action films. I was even thinking of sort of, the Payback film with Mel Gibson, whether there's, something even like, a dark streak of humor sometimes. So were you influenced by other films when you were putting together the aesthetic of it?
Yeah, I mean, Adrien and I definitely are huge fans of films of the 70s. In particular, like, the unapologetic, genre films of the 70s. And I think that, absolutely that stuff, contributes. And I think there's a sort of there's a way in which I think the movie sort of lives between the dialogue in a nice sort of a way. It's very much tapping into some of the same themes and the same kind of energy that you saw in those movies of the 70s, for sure. Yeah.
And I was also, on the shoot, what were some of the challenges and some of the highlights? Because it's very intense. There is a lot of sort of graphic, visceral violence, these action sequences. So what were some of the most difficult things about kind of pulling that off?
I mean, anytime you're making an independent film, like anybody who works on independent, or smaller budget films, my hats are off to them. You better really like it, because it's very, very difficult. You're always dealing with the schedule and scarcity of various whatever resources. But if you plan well and you have a really good team, you're able to succeed in a way that is that's very it's very intimate. The whole process of making a movie like that, working in upstate New York, in the middle of winter in itself is really fucking hard on a crew. It's freezing, and can be a little bit isolated, and there's snow, so transportation becomes complex. There are all sorts of things you need to do to prepare a set. The highlights are really, there's no interference. It really is just, you'd sure love more time and more resources, but at the end of the day, like, you have this incredible cast. We had a brilliant casting director, Paul Solet, and every single actor in that movie is wonderful. And you have Adrien Brody, who is, just completely brilliant, physically also as an actor, and really, really committed from the ground floor to this role. It's something that came from his heart, and it shows. So to get to watch that and to just to sort of, try to help facilitate that and sort of build a space where he can realize that, and to see him succeeding with it is fucking awesome and incredibly satisfying. I think the stunts in this movie are really great. We had an incredible stunt coordinator, Manny Severio, who's, just really one of the best, old school, super experienced. And he has a long-term relationship with Adrien. I think going back to Spike Lee's movies, he does Spike's movies. And so they have a shorthand already. And Adrien, a lot of people don't, may not know, Adrien is, physically, as far as stunts go, he's really, really, really gifted and committed and studious. And so he and Manny can work together and really get into the stunt coordination in a way that really is an extension of that character. And there's no sort of gratuitous choices there. Everything is coming from, who is this guy? What is his history with violence? And what is his, emotional relationship with violence? And, he's a sort of a spring that's been pushed down, a very powerful spring, push. And you get to see what happens when he, is finally let up. It's just like, it's a very, very bad man who's worked very hard to be good, who's then given a reason to be bad again, which is a very exciting structure for a film.
And I'm almost out of time, but the other elements I wanted to ask about is, of course, this incredible score, which I know Adrien had a huge part in, but also how the setting itself was really crucial to the film, both, I guess, kind of aesthetically, kind of the back alleyways, and, he's there like driving the dumpster truck, but also the feel of it, the constant threat of violence in those communities of deprivation, and, sort of, in a way tantalizing for someone who has kind of a predisposition to whether it's drugs or violence or these things. And it just seems to be surrounding you.
Yeah, no, Adrien worked very hard on the score. I'll address that first. It's scoring a movie, anyone who's scored a movie before or watched a movie be scored or worked with the composers, they're doing it. It's an incredibly technical process. It's very, very hard. And he worked his ass off. And he was very smart about identifying the right partners. He had some very, very gifted partners, and he worked his ass off. He had a real vision for what he wanted to sound like, and he did it. I think it's a very unusual, very, very unusual score, and totally successful. And he really worked at it. As for the environment, I'm glad you observed that. The environment is such a part of the film. It's just like, you can't art direct that. It's funny. I had made a documentary previously, and it was the first time I'd ever made a documentary. I love documentaries. It's the first time I ever made one, and it was one where we actually had a very muscular art department for some stuff, but for other stuff, you're trying to use the location, or when you're doing an interview, what do you have in this location? So I started working the muscle of being able to see what the environment has to offer, which was great here, because this Clean is so much about the place, the community, the place that he's in, and the texture that is already there. And Utica is that place. And it's no coincidence, that we started spitballing this walking around Manchester. There's a sort of a texture and a history, a sort of industrial history, and in a place where you can just feel that people have worked really fucking hard, and that time has a little bit moved on from those places and sort of forgotten some of those people. Hey, hi. I hope people, your kid is so cute. I hope people really appreciate what Adrien has done. He's just such a committed choice to make a film like this the way that we made this film. And I hope that they see how successful he was with that effort. That's the primary takeaway. I think, I also hope they have a good time. Yeah, I hope they have a good time watching it, and that they leave thinking about it. They're, it's a hell of a ride, but there are also themes of parenthood and, and fatherhood and and what that means involved too. So I'll let you go.
Thank you so much for sharing all that with me, and can't wait for everyone else to see Clean. Thank you so much.
You got it.
Thank you. Sorry.
No worries.